Hey there, everybody. Thank you guys so much for joining my YouTube channel, my Facebook channel, and my Twitch channel here at the Magical Solution. I'm really excited tonight because I'm going to be interviewing Lorraine Monteagut, that's how you say it, PhD, and she is the author of Brujas, The Magic and Power of Witches of Color. And I just before I even like get into her biography and start this conversation, I have to say this is seriously one of my favorite books of 2021. I can't speak enough of this. I recommend this to everyone. It has a little bit of everything in it. It's so relatable. Like I just can't. I can't speak more highly of it. Um so let's talk about Lorraine a little bit. She, obviously, like I said, is the author of Brujas, The Magic and Power of Witches of Color. She is born in Miami, Florida, to Cuban and Colombian immigrant parents, and she was inspired to the spiritual life by her great-grandmother, who was an espiritista in Cuba. She holds a PhD in communication from the University of South Florida, where she began her research on Bruja feminism and the reclamation of ancestral healing traditions. She currently manages a houseplant shop called Wild Roots in St. Pete, Florida. So without further ado, let's bring her in. Hey!
Hello.
I am so glad you're here, and I'm so thankful that you said yes to me for this interview.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you so much. This is my bedroom, everybody.
It looks cozy. It looks cozy.
It's very cozy.
So, girl, you did this book, and it is so good.
Oh, thank you.
It is so, so, so good. So, let's get the sort of, you know, trivial questions out of the way. What inspired you to write the book? Um, why? What's up? What's up with this?
Yeah, so I was in a PhD for a really long time. I started it in, I think, 2011. So I was just I was just trying to beat the recession. I was just trying to like figure out my life and make enough money to survive during this time when I couldn't get a good job. I had been laid off from the Miami Herald was my first job out of college, and I thought I was going to go into journalism and have this big career. And all of a sudden, the recession happened and everything just shut down. And I moved to Tampa and from Miami, and um, just went to school to just have a place to wait it out. And in the meantime, I just kept like false starts on different departments, projects. People would leave, like my advisors would leave and the projects would fall through, and I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. So I just was like, if I could write anything, or what do I really care about? And it was figuring out my roots, because my like a lot of us children of immigrant parents, a lot of our stories weren't passed down. A lot of things were kept hidden, secret. My great grandmother had been, as you mentioned, an espiritista in Cuba, and I was so, just curious about that, because I had experienced things that I wish that I had had guidance about, and I never did. So I started writing about like mostly my own experience and my family's experience during my PhD, and it took me a really long time to finish. It took me 7 years, and people usually do it in like 4 or 5 years, but it's not unheard of to take like a whole decade either. So I'm just like a very slow writer, very slow on everything, basically. So
No, girl, you intentional. You intentional.
yeah, yes, yeah. I had started writing some of the stories in the book. I started writing back in like 2011. So and then rewriting and just learning so much along the way. And then towards the end of my PhD, I realized, especially with the rise of like witches of Instagram, brujas of Instagram, that I was not by any means the only one doing this stuff. and that we were
Yes.
all kind of having these little epiphanies and having our own, journeys of rediscovering our ancestry and our roots and asking questions and, trying to connect. And so that opened up the space for more questions. And I thought, okay, I can keep going with this. And so I started talking to as many people as would talk to me. At the time I didn't have even as much of a social media presence as I do now, and which is still small, and they were so generous. It was just so amazing that people were like, yeah, of course I want to talk about this, and would just
Mm-hmm.
talk and tell me the most interesting personal things. And, so for a couple years, I just sat with people, at first in person, and then the pandemic happened. So then virtually, and just started
I
putting the
have
book
to
down.
I have to give you a huge shout out because you shout out so many people in this book. You give out their contact information, their websites, what it is that they're doing for our community. Like, the one thing I will say is yes, the book is about you in like weaved into the grander scheme of what witches of color are dealing with, what our community is dealing with. And throughout that weaving, you shout out all of these witches of color who are trying to do something about it. And I think that that is just so beautiful, like giving people platforms in a different light, aside from social media, aside from blogging, aside from this and YouTube channels. Like, you were like, no, let's write this down in stone because this is going to be here forever,
Yeah.
to say, let's shout out these names who are trying to make a difference. And I think that that's amazing. But I got to address the elephant in the room. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about it, okay? Because
How white I look.
you and I suffer from the same issue in terms of talking about subjects about people of color, whether it's witches of color, whatever.
Yeah.
You and I suffer from this problem of being not so
Blanking.
colorful. So,
Yeah.
we get a lot of the same criticism. It's like, what gives us the right, you know, what kind of experiences could we possibly speak on with regards to the experiences of people of color? And how would you address that? Like, what's your take on that?
I've from the beginning of the book have been very aware of my very specific position in this community. I am a white Latino, white passing, or Caucasian passing, person. Even among white Latinas, like I've seen even more like a Caucasian, just my features and just the way I talk and all that stuff. Um, so I knew that a book that was only centered on my experience would never do this movement justice, and it would be like robbing something that's not totally mine. And I have a very, legit claim to this community, and I'm part of it for sure. But there are so many other people who look so many different ways, who come from so many different backgrounds. And that's the whole point of this book, is that we are not a homogenous group. We are from all over. We look all different kinds of ways. Some of us speak Spanish, some of us don't, some of us speak an indigenous language. So I wanted to make sure to include as many people as possible to show just a sampling of all the different traditions that we're coming from. Um, and
Yeah.
yeah, have like a tribute, I guess, a tribute to community instead of just one story or one expertise, because we're all basically creating this as we go along.
Yes.
So,
Yes. And I
yeah.
think another thing you did really, really well with your book too is you also weaved in the intersectionalities of all these other subcategories that people of color engage in. So you brought in queer magic, you brought in feminism, you brought in, urban living versus, what do you call it?
Suburban,
Outskirts.
yeah.
Suburb living. You brought in so many different elements of what it is that we go through in addition to being a person of color, and how our role kind of plays out slightly differently in those scenarios.
Yeah.
Um, So I have to give you props to that. And even the people that you shouted out, the diversity that you shouted out. You had brujas that are light skinned like you and me. You had Afro Latinas. You had everything in between. So I think you just did so beautifully to make sure that it was just inclusive. It told a diverse story, but it also told your story in it as well. I can't, again, I cannot scream enough about how much I love this book, and also just like the little pieces that I related to with you. You know, I'm not going to give anything away, you guys. I'm not. I'm going to try not to. But there were some bits and pieces that I was like, oh my God, she said that specific tree. I grew up with that tree. And oh my God, she said that specific animal that she had a meditation with. Oh my God, that's my animal. And like all these things. And I was like, no way.
That's so cool.
So for sure, for sure. But I wanted to focus on a very specific chapter of the book, which is what our flyer is named after, which is the Abuelita Magick.
Mhm.
And this idea of decolonizing, our spiritual practices. And this chapter, I mean, don't get me wrong, all of the book is amazing, but this chapter really hit hard because I think, you know what? I'm going to let you talk about it because I can literally talk about this book all day. What does decolonizing spirituality mean to you? And what was your take on what was your influence for the Abuelita medicine chapter?
Okay. So, decolonization is this big buzzword that's thrown around a lot in these conversations. And I just want to, unpack that for a second. Um, it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And I think what it always starts with is an acknowledgement of where you're coming from and what your perspective is in this grander scheme. So for me, it's never divorced from the fact that I am a light skinned Latina, that I have walked through this world with some privilege that others don't enjoy. And that there will always be spaces that, even though I consider myself in the larger umbrella of witches of color, there are POC or especially BIPOC spaces that um, I am not included in, right? And that I will never be included in. So I try to frame it as, what are the spaces of influence that you can operate in a respectful way that helps helps you connect, but also doesn't harm others in the process. And so much of the time with these spiritual practices, they become trendy, and they get you know commercialized, and then you can go and buy all of these things at any shop, and it becomes about the material instead of like the intention behind your work. Um,
Yeah.
so, so for me, it was just grounding myself in where I was in my life and saying, this is who I am and this is what I can do. Um, and at the moment and in the chapter, it's just getting into the dirt and the literal ground beneath me, because a lot of hard stuff happened, to a lot of us during the pandemic, and there was really nothing to do but sit still. And so the spiritual practice became about kind of acceptance and like that relinquishing of control to the earth. And so a lot of Abuelita Magick is about returning to basics, nourishing what you have and what you have at your disposal, instead of wishing that you could do things a certain way with other people's things and practices, developing your own. And some of us have a deep connection to our ancestral tradition, so we have something to start with. Some of us don't. So, and I really didn't, not very strongly. So, because my grandmother, as much as she did this work, she didn't teach me any of it. So, we didn't talk about it. So, for me, it was learning how to nourish the actual dirt. And in that chapter, I believe I interviewed, or I sat on a workshop by, at the time, they were calling themselves La Loba Loca. And now it's Flora Pacha, I believe, is their handle right now. So I don't know if I changed that in the book. I think I did. I think I put their current handle is Flora Pacha.
Yes.
And they do such wonderful work educating people on how to renourish the soil beneath you. And they call this Abuelita magic. Um, this idea that the soil is here for not just us, but for the generations that follow, and that we cannot take without replenishing.
Right.
And this principle you can apply to so many different areas of life, not just gardening, not just your spiritual practice, but just everything. What am I leaving for the future? What is our legacy here? What are we creating, and not just for production and consumption, but to nourish all the forms of life around us. And for me, I personally get into beekeeping because I love bees and insects. Insects is like my thing. It's like this thing that we're taught to kind of be scared of or try to get rid of with pesticides and all this. And to sit and just watch the little insects thrive and crawl all over me was a form of magic. It really was. So that's what that chapter is about.
It's interesting that you brought up your grandma, being a part of a lot of these practices, but not teaching you. And it just goes to show how deep the colonization did go. Our ancestors, they come to this country, the religion of the oppressor was, hounded into them.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of them had a lot of shame around what they looked like, around their accents, used skin lighteners, would dye their hair blonde, would try and wear contacts or lighten their eyes using harsh chemicals. All
Mm-hmm.
kinds of things would happen in for the art of survival to fit in. And the spirituality was the thing that was the hardest to let go, but it was necessary in some instances. And I think the interesting part, like you said, is the plant medicine. Like I don't think I've met not one Latina person, not one person of color that didn't say to me, yeah, my grandma never taught me this, or even if they had access to their grandma, but she did teach me how to make soups, or she did teach me how to put teas together, or she did know how to make salves, or she did know, and it was always something having to do with plant medicine. So if
Mm-hmm.
nothing else survived, they were able to at least leave behind little just fragments of what it is that we do and where it is that we come from. And I think what you're doing is beautiful because you took that and you're making your own mark on it too. Like some people will take that plant medicine and say, "Oh, I like working with the energy of the plants," and start going the magical route. Some people will take the plants and go, "You know what? I like the herbalism part of it. I'm just gonna keep going down this road." And
Mm-hmm.
you were like, "You know what? I like all the insects and the animals and the creatures that help these plants thrive and give these plants life, and I'm gonna hang out with them." And you're making your own little mark, and I think that that's so important. You're right. That's legacy that you're leaving behind. It's amazing.
I hope so.
Yeah, man, for sure. For sure. And I think another thing too is, in that chapter, you talk a little bit about how, especially like in this day and age, and especially during the pandemic, everyone was in survival mode. Like people
Yeah,
were buying out toilet paper
I
and like
know.
food and like things were going off the shelf.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the ways in which we, as people of color, can help decolonize our spiritual practices is by returning to that plant medicine root and allowing that knowledge to be of service to people during times of emergency and pandemics,
Mm-hmm.
healing and giving out those medicines. I remember there was a call, I want to say like maybe last year, when there was a big threat about abortion happening. There was going to be some severe laws being passed. And I remember doing like a call out to people saying, "All right, ladies, all right, our people, like it's time to get our medicines for natural abortions because these women are going to be needing us soon.
Yeah,
Otherwise, we're going to be getting these back alley crazy things happening again."
I know. I mean, I don't know if you've been following. I'm in Florida, so don't know if you've been following like our
Yes. Yes.
just yeah, they're trying to make it illegal, and it's just going to have a terrible impact on people who don't have access, and it's dangerous,
It's so
dangerous
dangerous.
lives. So, yeah, I think this concept of mutual aid, which is also a topic in the chapter, is really important in times of crisis. I think that we shouldn't have to need only mutual aid. Mutual aid networks are, like grassroots, community driven efforts to fill in the gaps when governments and economies are not working for people. And we definitely saw that in the pandemic in a huge way with access to food, access to fresh food, access to medicine. Um, and there was many indigenous led and black led organizations that went into neighborhoods and help feed people,
Yeah.
and get them a vaccine and whatever it is. Um, and that's, I think, is an important thing that we can do. Is to tap into these movements because people really do want to help each other. I think, like at the root, I think we are good and we love our neighbor. I do think that I see it all the time, but the way that our economy is set up is competitive, and it's meant to like butt us against each other. Like I live in an area right now that's being heavily gentrified. I think it's also a topic in that chapter. I have a tendency to smash lots of topics into one tiny space.
But it works.
But it's so people are being pitted against each other. It's like uh, instead of looking at this grand, like the systemic issue that's leading to homelessness, and to hunger and all this stuff that continues to be a huge problem during the pandemic. If we were to come together more and more, that would only be helpful and good. Though we need to though at the same time we do need to like change systems and press government to. But in governments like ours, we live in Florida, and it's always, I mean, I don't want to say always, but so far it's been Republican led.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's not really.
But I feel like these grassroots movements that you talk about, I feel like we're no stranger to that. We're, like our ancestry was no stranger to loving thy neighbor and taking care of thy neighbor. Like, you go back to our islands, you go back to our places, our abuelitas, if you will, the community, when they needed a remedy, when they needed a reading, when they needed something, they would go to grandma's house. They would go to that little old lady's house who did the thing. You know what I mean? And she would open the door and have food out, and there was always like this kind of sense of like welcoming. I know in Puerto Rico, my great grandparents during the Great Depression opened up their farm and fed everyone that walked by. They would just feed. So it's just this sense of like we're all in this together. We're all here, and I think indigenous people of color, like, we're just no stranger to that. Like, we just understand that so deeply, and whether or not we've kept that, whether or not we've might have lost that, that might be on an individual basis or maybe like a community basis. But I think overall, you're right. People are good. People are good. I want to
Yeah,
believe that.
I love the idea that the legacy is as simple as being available to help, because that is something that my abuelita did, my abuelita Elvira in Cuba, when people were struggling with losing their loved ones. They went to her if they had an illness or whatever. They went to her for a session, and she, I'm not sure how she operated it. I wish I knew. I wish I knew if it was like an open door situation or who's taking her appointments. How does this actually work? But that is something that, though the actual technology of what she did was not passed down to me, and I didn't like apprentice or anything, I do feel like there was the sense of like, I am here for you if you need me. And so I've tried to maintain that throughout my work is, when people need to talk, within reason. There's another thing like about boundaries.
Of course, yeah.
With this work, because a lot of times when, you're doing healing work or spiritual work, there's a sense that like you're available all the time. And obviously that can't be the case if you need to like, if you need to sustain your work, you need to rest. And So I would have loved to ask her, like, how did you balance that and the need, like so much need in people, um, and also just how did you get them to help themselves? Because that's something that I at first struggled
Yes.
with. You think like, oh, I need to give these people answers, but it's really about helping them ask the right questions for themselves, and
Yes.
and work on their own work. Um, so
Sometimes I think like the Abuelita magic or just women's magic in general, I think is just such a threat to modern day everything because
mhm,
we played so many roles in history. Like we were the psychiatrist, the healer, the teacher, the mother, the friend. Like we did all the gardener, just all the things. And you're right. When customers came or customers, when our community came in,
mhm,
you're right. It was about kind of guiding and showing people what it is that they needed to see for them to heal themselves.
mhm,
We didn't have to do all the work, and those are some of the legacies that our abuelitas left behind for us, the women specifically left behind for us. You
mhm.
have a question here from Andy that says, since your grandma didn't share her knowledge with you, how did you learn your spiritual practices?
I read, I was always a real big reader, so I read and became a student of religion at an early age, and learned a lot about a lot of different traditions. Particularly those that came out of my parents' home countries in Colombia and Cuba. So I I connected, and though there's always like a split in me between the intellectual who's learning and then the person who practices. As much as I learn about these things, I felt like personally, since I didn't have a teacher right there, that it wasn't like always open to me completely. So I just kind of developed things as I went along myself. So
Yeah.
what I just kind of chased what felt like magic to me. And a lot of it was, um, the dream work and these deep, dark shadow things. I write about the shadow in the book a lot because it was really the impetus of my exploration is why do I see these shadows? What are they? And so
Mm,
doing quote unquote shadow work, which I know is another loaded term these days, um, it's not traditionally tied to any kind of witchcraft, but it came out of psychology and is now, kind of being married to it. And
yeah.
so I like to always say, therapy is good and having a therapist is good for this work because you can get really into some hard stuff. But that's basically like the practice that I have developed for myself, grounded in the ancestral altar, I would say. So how did I learn? I just connected with a lot of, you know, spiritual practitioners who showed me a little here and there what they were doing. And
Yeah.
you find what works for you. And what worked for me was having my altar. That's like the constant, in
Yeah.
terms of my spiritual practice and what we would tend to think as magical is my communication with through my altar with my ancestors and also with myself and with future me. And journaling and writing is my spiritual practice, and gardening and um, doing the alchemy of turning the dirt into something that things can grow out of. Because we live in Florida and it's all sand, and it's like I think it is a form of magic to make that sand grow stuff. So
Mhm.
and to save the bees too. I love bees.
Yes.
So
Oh,
yeah, what we
love
all
it.
call I guess what we call magic is all very different for all of us. And I always encourage people to like, learn what they can from others, read as much as you can, but at the end of the day, follow what your heart wants to do
Yeah.
and what's sustainable for you. What will you keep doing over time? And for me, it's been like visiting the altar, writing.
Yeah. And I love, again, like, you know, you were able to take a situation and adapt and be flexible and piece things together and trial and error and do all the things again that our abuelitas had to do during this time of change and turmoil. Like, I remember my grandmother coming here to America for the first time, didn't speak a lick of English, was barely 16, married with one kid already, and this whole new world of America was there, and she had to figure out how to get jobs, how to survive, and she did, and she adapted, and she moved things around. She was Catholic, right? Catholic. And she, and that's what I'm saying. It's that perseverance, that endurance, that grit that is passed down. And I think people of color and witches of color, that is just like in our blood. Like there's so many of us that I hear that are so afraid to go to therapy. So afraid to go to therapy. Like they are looking at that situation like, yeah, okay, I might have some problems, sure, but like life still goes on. I still have to go to work. I still have to do X, Y, and Z. Like I don't have time to sit there and like be triggered about things. Like, you know what I mean? And it's true. We've had to learn how to trauma survive
Yeah.
with our own magic. And I think you're right. I think now that we've gotten to a point where survival really isn't like the main concern. Well, lately I can't say that, but overall throughout
Relatively
our
speaking.
history, it's
Yeah.
not like a main concern anymore. So like we have time to reflect. Like the shadow has time to creep his ugly ass head up and be like, you got some shit to address, girl. you know?
And
Yeah.
the magical part about it is when you address your shadow, you're doing it for the generations that came before you that didn't have time to, that couldn't. They couldn't because, like if you're trying to assimilate to this country, you do not in any way want to suggest that you have a mental illness. And there was a huge stigma around that, growing up. And there still is. Like, I started to go into therapy for myself to help with my depression and all these things that were happening in the last few years. And my parents are like, well, do you really need that? Like, don't.
I know.
You're okay. Don't only like really crazy people need that. It's like, no.
Or like, did I do a bad job as a parent? Like, are you really
right.
that fucked
And
up?
I'm like, yes, you did.
The
Yeah.
spoon
So
could have stayed on the wall that one time.
yeah, so like it's a lot to break that stigma and to get the help you need. And I always leaned on magic and spirituality to help me through when I didn't have access to therapists or when it didn't feel right. It costs a lot of money to get a good therapist sometimes too. So um, you know that's where the magic came in for me, was to fill those gaps, to help me feel connected and well, and help me work through stuff in the absence of other help. So
And healing, yeah, like you said, healing is part of that decolonization of your spirituality. You're healing, you're retroactively healing the traumas of your ancestry, and you're proactively healing traumas of the future generations by cutting things in its track, by stopping it before you can project it onto your children and whatnot. And I think that is such a amazing thing to think about, because you talk in your book about how like indigenous activists, especially around the subjects of like land back, and this idea of like what's the right word, uh, progressive politics within the indigenous community. You see sort of like this parallel happening between the inward decolonization, the inward healing that's required for you to decolonize your spirituality, and the external stuff that you're seeing with this idea of land back, this idea of, community and mutual aid, this idea of connecting to the earth and protecting the earth. There's this mirror thing happening that you saw in your chapter. And I would love for you to kind of elaborate on that, because it's so freaking necessary, you guys. It's so necessary.
well, I was honestly just really engrossed at the time that I was writing this with the stuff that was going on around land back, specifically because during the Trump presidency, like he went out of his way to like,
He really did.
there was a speech that he gave at Mount Rushmore that was like, this is not the Native people's land, and um, it's completely wrong, and it's like
Yeah.
watching history being rewritten right in front of you. Um, And I think, yes, a lot of decolonization work and the shadow work that we have to do as a country, as a nation, and also as individuals is to ask ourselves, like, what ills have we perpetuated ourselves, you know, and in our communities? What have we done wrong? Um, and how can we fix it?
Yeah.
And you know, a lot of what we've done wrong is like to the land. Um, you know, who have we taken it from? What have we taken from, you know, the diversity of nature to produce? You know, the best example is like cash crops. You know, like um, you know, the way that we mass farm food. Um,
Oh my
when
God.
we
Don't even
and
get me
we
started.
I know when we reduce the biodiversity that was just naturally there, we like superimpose it with our new way of thinking and our new economy. And underneath the surface, that old way is still under there. You know, it's still under there. We just need to dig it up. We just need to help it out. Um,
Yeah, and it's I actually saw this thing on TikTok, because I love the conspiracy theories of things, and a person had said, you know, the universe will give us lessons, and if we don't learn these lessons, we're doomed to repeat them. And we keep coming back to war because every time we've been presented with war, we haven't addressed it at the root, with peace and with community and with diplomacy and all that stuff. And so war will just keep happening. Or we pollute our waters and then wonder why we are all sick. And the lesson just keeps recycling itself. We're polluting the land with burning down all the trees and allowing oil spills to occur. And then we wonder why certain prices are up or why animals are going extinct. And it's just, again, it's a whole projection of how we internally are ill, we're sick. It's a not we, we know who we talking about here. But the greed and the people that are in power who probably don't have that connection to quote unquote their abuelita magic, their ancestral communal types of magic and communal types of spirituality. It's very individual. Like our ancestry is communal, you know,
mhm.
the islands.
You bring up war, and I've just been like sick to death the
Ugh,
last few days with what's happening with Russia and Ukraine. And I'm just like, this is just like we see it again. History repeats, like you said. It's been a long time coming, and this is how it plays out when a power is left unchecked. And it's like, this is colonization happening before us. This is how it works. It's like, it's
exactly.
violent, it's terrible, and it happens a lot. It's, you know, we think of wars like in our generation because we haven't really gone through one. If we're the millennial generation, well, I mean, of course we have. We've gone through Afghanistan and Iraq,
Yeah.
but I think this is the first time that we feel things so close to home. You know, with the pandemic, it's a war in itself. You know,
Yeah.
uh, feeling it
But
close to
even
home.
if it's happening across the sea, the
Mhm.
fact that we're all connected online, the fact that you can see a video from a Ukraine person
Mhm.
crying and screaming,
Mhm.
it is close to home. It's on your screen right here in your hand, despite it being across the ocean.
Mhm.
It's crazy.
Yeah, and just watching the people get together and like say, "This is my country and I'm fighting for it," and like people who are just regular people, like a software programmer or an actor, like going and getting guns and going to their borders, is like chilling to me. This is like this is their reality. Like we are, some of us are lucky to never have had to deal with that kind of violence and terror. Um,
Yeah.
so I don't know how we
Yeah.
got off on this. Sorry, everyone.
Yeah, no, but
There's a war happening, and
there's a war
it's
happening, but like, yeah, but it's a reflection. It's a reflection of that healing that we need to do. And
Mhm.
that healing stems back from from us looking at our ancestry, looking at how our people did what they did. And Abuelita Magic helps us to kind of refocus again, bring us back to the earth, have appreciation for the earth. If you did, war would not be an option. Polluting your waters, polluting your air would not be even a thought in the mind, you know? And like you had said earlier, only taking what you can give back. Like,
Mhm.
honestly, it's not that hard. There's enough for everybody. I don't understand.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I'm reading this wonderful book. By the way, hold on a second. It's
Yes.
on the other side of my bed.
While she's going to get that book, again, I'm going to plug this book because this book that she had wrote is filled with resources and shout outs of people of color, witches of color who are doing so much in our community, everything from art to feminism to LGBTQI awareness to indigenous, politics and and protecting the earth and the environment, all of that. She has shout outs of people who are doing stuff about it. And these are the people that we want to raise up, we want to give platforms to, we want to listen, we want to support, we want to donate to. And that's part of decolonizing our practices, coming together, reunifying so that spirit can flow through again, you guys. Like, that's the whole point of all of this. I know there's a lot of questions in the live right now that's talking about like ghosts and like magic and stuff like that. That's the fun stuff that we can play with later once you've gotten yourself recentered. You get what I'm saying, bro?
Questions about ghosts. I'm interested.
Yeah, there's
Hold on a second.
there's
Before we get to that, I
yes.
just want to make one point about what you said. I'm very Gemini, so like I'm a little magpie and I like to gather information. So I wanted this book to be like a snapshot of like everything that I've kind of gathered up to this point, and I never wanted to be like this is how it is 100%, and this is like an exhaustive history or anything like that. It's more of, I think it kind of reads like a reference almost, where you can like see what really inspires you as you read it, and whatever topic that is, then there are references and resources that you can go to that go more in depth, like way more than I do in any topic in this book. And you can find like actual rituals and real witches out there who are, I'm not that I'm not a real witch, but I definitely focus more on like the conceptual stuff, instead of like this is the only way to do things. But there are a lot of practitioners out there who have like grimoires and spell books and all this cool stuff on these topics that you can go and explore. And so I'm always just looking for more and more resources. So I was going to show you this book. I don't know if you've read yet. Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Walkmer. Have you
No, I've been recommended this, but I have not gotten it yet. Okay, going to Amazon right now.
It's incredible. And it's a story, and it's so moving and beautifully told, but it also has like very practical things you can do in there, especially if you like gardening. So written by an indigenous woman who knows how to honor the land and how to receive and give, and it's so wonderful. So anyway, what's the ghost question? Because that's
Robin Wall Kilmer?
Kimmerer. So Kimmerer.
Love it.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Indigenous wisdom, scientific knowledge, and the teaching of plants. She's a botanist as well as a spiritual practitioner. So she like combines the two. Because I don't think there's any separation between magic and science. I really do think they go together. So
yes, definitely. I'm going to get you guys the link to this book. Don't you worry, because I think, again, gotta have it. Yeah. So the question was, where was it? How can I incorporate my ghost friends into my magical practice? They love energy.
Yes, they do. You gotta be
careful. Sure do.
So when I was a kid, I was just such a little pendeja. Like I would just sit there in my room and be like, ghosts, come to me. Like I'm an open vessel, and like you get what you wish for in those situations. And then I wasn't being left alone. And it was really hard to, be balanced and healthy when you've got like all this stuff coming at you. So first things first, you need a container of some sort. You need a way to have boundaries around. And I'm sure you have classes on this as an espiritista
Yes.
yourself, so I would recommend going to Lailani's.
Thank you.
You know, I'm not sure what form this takes. Is it workshops or one-on-one? But she can definitely train if you are interested in channeling and speaking with spirits. I think it's very important to train with someone who can show you how to have those boundaries so that you're not constantly open to those energies, because they can really fuck with you. They really can.
Facts.
And it's a wonderful practice, but it really requires like knowing how to control so that you can get the most out of it and help these spirits reach wherever they need to go or have the answers that you need to, communicate to whoever it is. But yeah, just first step is like learn the boundaries of everything. And I think
Yes.
altars and places to do this work, and then ways to like cleanse yourself before and after, these kind of rituals are definitely things you can learn and you can start practicing that. But I would recommend a teacher for sure.
Yeah, especially when it comes to spirits, when it comes to ghosts, that's
Mm-hmm.
definitely a subject you're gonna need guidance with. It's not always smart to kind of jump in with that right off the bat, for
It's
sure.
and it's good if you have that kind of like openness to it. That's a good gift. I mean, that's an incredible gift, that I think you should nurture. But I had it, growing up, and I didn't have my grandmother to show me, so I just kind of like, and I opened up to it, and then I was like, oh no, I can't do that. Close. Until I had some help,
Yes.
and so I
But
learned.
you started with that altar, and like again though, even having an altar like that will
Mhm.
open you up to getting the messages either via dreams or meditations, so that you can get taught directly from your ancestors. You know what I mean? Like you can tap in, you know what I mean? Now, don't get me wrong, I still recommend a real living life person mentor, but
Yeah,
you
but
can
it
get
is
that
true. It
too.
is true. I have had dreams of my abuelita telling me things, and it really does feel like she's like transmitting something to me because I've opened myself to like my connection with her through the altar. And so it is nice to maybe start with your ancestors or someone that you know that and love that has passed,
Yeah.
because ghosts come and spirits come in all forms, and
Yes.
some are benign and some are not. And so, yeah.
And start with memories. Start with like good memories that you might have. Like, do you remember cooking or being in the kitchen while she's cooking something, or you know what I mean? Or like a certain song that there was always playing, or even like a smell. Those kinds of things are great ways to connect for sure. For sure. Lorraine, we had a great conversation. We covered a lot of stuff. We covered a lot of stuff. And I feel like there was one word in this chapter that you hit so hard. I think you said it was a word from either Portugal or Peru,
Oh,
but it was
saudade.
the definition of longing for a home that didn't really exist or like wasn't really there.
Hmm. Memories
Sure.
that you never really lived, but you have
Yeah.
memory of. That's a word that doesn't. We don't have a word for it in English, at least. I'm not sure if there's a word for it in Spanish, but it's saudade. So Saudade.
Yes.
And yeah, it's this longing. It's a
It's
longing
a
for connection.
longing.
Yeah.
And that word, I think, is a perfect, and I'm glad you started that chapter off with that word, because I think it's a perfect representation of like that's the calling.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? Like that's the pull. When things are going wrong, when war is happening, so many times you'll hear people say, I just want to escape. I just want to go home, even if they're in their own bedroom. I want to be somewhere else. That's a pull, that's a longing, but it's not necessarily a depressive thing. It's not necessarily a bad thing.
It's
That
not.
might be the time in which you start healing. This is the time where your ancestors, where your abuelitas of the past are calling you to reconnect and start doing the thing, you
Go
know?
and
Go
find
in.
that little seed of inspiration that helps you transform that shadow into something better and clarify it, not better, but because there is good in the shadow, but
Yeah.
clarifying it into something beautiful and creative. and helpful for you. So yeah.
Girl, we are coming to an end, and I don't want to because I feel like I can talk about this book forever. I want to be like, okay, let's go to the next chapter. Let's do that one. And
should
we
do
did
a
literally like a
club.
whole hour on just one chapter. So that just goes to show how meaty and juicy this book is and how much you guys are going to love it. So I really highly suggest you get it. I left a link for it in the chat, as well as the link for braiding sweetgrass as well. Lorraine, where can people find you? Do you have any projects, anything coming up that you want to let people know about?
Yes.
And
You can
most
find me.
importantly, do you have something you want to say to the listener before you
Okay.
go?
You can find me in the ether.
I am
But
always
really,
around.
I'm watching. Instagram is definitely the best way to connect with me at Witchy Heights. WITCHYHEIGHTS. Witchy Heights.
Mm.
I chose that like years ago, and now I can't change it. So that's my handle. And what was the other question?
And if you had like any events or anything coming
Oh yeah,
up,
yeah. I not at the moment. I have a couple little things, but they're kind of local. So if you're in St. Pete, Tampa Bay area, please pop in on me at Wild Roots. It's where I work. I work at a houseplant shop, taking care of plants, and also I do astrology and tarot workshops.
nice.
So sometimes I'm available for personal readings. I have less time for that now, but I'm always open. So if you want to give me a shout on DM or whatever email, I always make sure to make time to respond. And I guess what I want to leave you with is there was a time where I was going through, and I'm always going through shit, but like when I was in the deep, deep dark, and I just thought that like I would never get out of it, and that I would never make it and, accomplish my goals and all the things that I wanted to do with myself and be in balance. And I think it's just don't rush anything, whatever it is that you want to do, whether it's healing yourself or launching a business or having a family, whatever it is, just love yourself through the process. The process is really where it's at. That's really where the magic is anyway. Once you get the thing that you're looking for, it loses its luster anyway. It's just all about taking care of yourself and sticking with things that matter and, creating like a sustainable way to do your work because the world needs your work. So take care of yourselves. And I want to see all of the things that came out, of you connecting to these kind of communities. And we're all here to help. And hopefully you can reach out to either me or whoever it is in the book that really speaks to you, and they will be there for you. They're really lovely people. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for really reals. This was an amazing discussion about an amazing book written by an amazing person, and I hope to see you again really soon. I hope you continue doing your thing.
I will. I'll
Yeah,
continue.
we will definitely cross paths again. It's
I'm
all right,
sure.
guys. I want to give a nice shout out to a couple of the people that showed up tonight. Mel, Tina, Tyrone, Ren, Andy, Raina, Dice Controller, Vincent, Steven, all
Wow.
you guys. A
So
lot of
many.
people. Natasha, so many people. And of course, the people who will be watching during the replay. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to hang out with us tonight and to watch this episode of This Is How We Grow. Have a wonderful Sunday night, and we'll see you soon. Bye.